Dominic Russo installed cameras throughout his mansion to monitor the new nanny. He had fired 15 before her and was certain this one would reveal her true colors soon enough. But after 3 weeks of surveillance, what the cameras captured left the most powerful mafia boss in Chicago frozen in place. It wasn't the nanny doing something wrong. It was his 4-year-old son kneeling alone in the darkness at 2 a.m, asking his dead mother for permission to love someone else, wondering if he was a bad boy for wanting to be held. And the person who made that child think such things wasn't an enemy, wasn't the brutal underworld outside those walls. It was him, the father who had built a fortress to protect his son but had locked himself on the outside. 3 weeks earlier, the Monday morning sun had barely touched the Chicago skyline when Dominic Russo opened his eyes. 5 o'clock, the same time he had woken every day for the past 10 months. Sleep, when it came at all, never stayed long. He lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling of the master bedroom. The silk sheets beside him were cold, untouched, perfectly smooth. No one had slept on that side of the bed since the night everything changed. On the nightstand, a silver frame held a photograph of a woman with dark hair and warm brown eyes. Elena, his wife, the only person who had ever made him feel like more than the monster the world believed him to be. 10 months ago, she had been alive. 10 months ago, this room had been filled with her laughter, her perfume, her warmth. Now it was just another empty space in a house full of them. Dominic rose and walked to the window. Below, the Russo estate spread out like a fortress. And that was exactly what it was. 12-foot walls topped with electric wire surrounded the property. 24 guards patrolled in rotating shifts. 40 security cameras monitored every angle, every entrance, every shadow. The most advanced surveillance system money could buy. None of it had saved Elena. The memory hit him without warning. As it always did, the black SUV pulling into the driveway, Elena waving goodbye through the window, blowing a kiss to Matteo, who watched from the upstairs playroom. The explosion that turned the morning into hell. Fire, screaming, his own voice, raw and broken, calling her name as he ran toward flames that consumed everything. And Matteo, 4 years old, standing at the window, watching his mother burn. The boy had not spoken a single word since that day. Dominic pressed his forehead against the cold glass. The doctors called it selective mutism, a trauma response. They said Matteo might speak again with time, with therapy, with patience. But 10 months had passed, and the silence remained. His son moved through the house like a ghost, building towers with his Lego blocks, never crying, never laughing, never making a sound. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in." Vinny Moretti entered, a leather folder tucked under his arm. At 52, Vinny had been with the Russo family longer than Dominic had been alive. He was more than a right hand. He was the closest thing to a father Dominic had left. "The new nanny arrives for her interview at 9, Vinny said. "Grace Sullivan, 27. Good references." Dominic turned from the window, his face settling into the cold mask he wore like armor. "References mean nothing. The last one had excellent references. She lasted 6 days. This one is different. She needs the job, badly. They all need the job, and they all leave." Dominic adjusted his cufflinks, his movements precise, controlled. "She will be no different from the others." Vinny opened his mouth to respond, but the sound of the doorbell cut through the house. Both men looked at the security monitor mounted on the wall. The screen showed the front gate, where a woman stood in the pouring rain. She had no umbrella, no coat. Her clothes clung to her thin frame, soaked through. But she did not hunch against the weather or shift impatiently. She simply stood there, looking directly into the camera. Her eyes were green, and in them, Dominic saw something he had not expected. No fear, none at all. The guards brought her through the front entrance, their hands hovering near their weapons as if she might pose some threat. Grace Sullivan walked between them with her spine straight and her chin level, leaving a trail of rainwater on the marble floor. She did not apologize for the mess. She did not shrink beneath the weight of the crystal chandeliers or the paintings that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. Dominic watched her from the top of the staircase. Most people who entered this house for the first time could not hide their reactions. Their eyes would widen at the opulence. Their voices would tremble when they spoke. They understood, on some instinctive level, that they had stepped into the territory of a predator. This woman showed none of that. She stood in the center of the foyer, water dripping from her auburn hair, and simply waited. When Dominic descended the stairs, she met his gaze without flinching. Up close, he could see the details the security camera had missed. Dark circles beneath her green eyes, poorly concealed. Cheekbones too sharp, suggesting meals skipped or stretched thin, a frame that seemed built for more weight than it currently carried. But none of that diminished the steel in her expression. "You are early," Dominic said, "and wet. The bus broke down 6 blocks away." I walked. Her voice was calm, matter of fact. I did not want to be late. He gestured toward the sitting room, and she followed without hesitation. Vinny remained by the door, watching silently. "Tell me about your experience," Dominic said once they were seated. He remained standing, a deliberate choice to emphasize the power differential. Grace did not seem to notice. Or perhaps she simply did not care. 3 years as a caregiver at Westbrook Assisted Living, 2 years as a private nanny for the Henderson family before they relocated to Spain. I have references from both. References can be fabricated. They can. Mine are not. Dominic studied her for a long moment. Then he leaned forward slightly, allowing the coldness to seep into his voice. "Do you know who I am, Miss Sullivan? What I do?" Most applicants would have stammered at this point, would have suddenly remembered an urgent appointment elsewhere, would have fled. Grace Sullivan did not blink. "I know," she said, "and I do not care. I am here for the child, not for you." The silence that followed was absolute. Even Vinny shifted uncomfortably by the door. No one spoke to Dominic Russo this way. No one. And yet here she sat, soaking wet and clearly desperate for work, telling him to his face that his power meant nothing to her. "Why do you need this job?" he asked, his tone sharpening. The truth. For the first time, something flickered across her face. A hesitation. A wound briefly visible before she covered it again. "My brother," she said quietly. "Tommy. He is 19. Cerebral palsy since birth. He needs specialized care that I cannot provide alone. The facility where he lives costs more than I can earn working 3 jobs." She paused. "I owe $87,000 in medical bills. This position pays enough to keep him safe. That is why I need this job." There was more. Dominic could sense it, shadows lurking behind her words. But she offered nothing else, and he did not press. Instead, he pulled a document from the folder on the table and handed it to her. 47 rules, he said. Non-negotiable. Grace took the contract and began to read. Her expression remained neutral through most of it. Then she stopped. Her finger rested on a single line, and when she looked up, her eyes had turned to ice. Rule 23, she said slowly. No physical affection unless medically necessary. She set the paper down. Who decides what is necessary, Mr. Russo? You, or the child who needs it? The question hung in the air like a blade waiting to fall. Dominic felt his jaw tighten. He was not accustomed to being questioned, certainly not by someone who should be grateful just to sit in this room. And yet this woman, with her wet clothes and her impossible composure, had just challenged the very foundation of how he was raising his son. My son needs to be strong, he said, his voice cold and measured. The world we live in does not reward weakness. I will not raise him to depend on anyone. Dependency is vulnerability. Vulnerability gets people killed. Grace did not look away. You want a 4-year-old to need no one? Or do you want him to stop needing you? The words struck something deep, something Dominic had buried beneath layers of control and grief. His eyes narrowed. You know nothing about my son. I know he has not spoken in 10 months. I know 15 nannies have come and gone. And I know that the rules you just handed me would make it impossible for any child to feel safe enough to heal. She paused. Those are not the rules of a father protecting his son. Those are the rules of a man terrified of losing again. Dominic stood abruptly. His chair scraped against the floor with a harsh sound that echoed through the room. He moved toward her, using every inch of his height, every ounce of the presence that made grown men tremble. Grace remained seated. She did not flinch, did not lean back, did not break eye contact. You should be careful, Dominic said softly, the threat clear beneath the quiet tone. People who speak to me this way tend to regret it. I grew up without being held. Mr. Russo, her voice was steady, but something beneath it cracked open, just for a moment. I know what that does to a person. I know the silence that grows inside when no one touches you. I know how it feels to wonder if you are worthy of love at all. She stood slowly, bringing herself closer to him rather than retreating. Your son is 4 years old. He watched his mother die, and now he lives in a house full of people who are forbidden to comfort him. What do you think that is teaching him? Dominic said nothing. He could not, because somewhere beneath the armor, her words had found flesh. 15 nannies before you, he finally managed, his voice rougher than he intended. None lasted a month, not because of me, because they could not do their job. They were afraid of you. Grace held his gaze without wavering. I have lived with real monsters, Mr. Russo. You do not scare me. The silence that followed was heavy, weighted with things neither of them was willing to say aloud. Dominic searched her eyes, looking for the lie, the manipulation, the angle she must be playing. He found only truth. Painful, unbending truth. You are hired, he said abruptly. Start now. Grace nodded once. Thank you. She turned and walked toward the door. One more thing. She stopped but did not turn around. If anything happens to my son, Dominic said, the words carrying the full weight of who he was and what he was capable of, there is nowhere you could hide that I would not find you. Slowly, Grace turned. Her eyes had changed. The composure remained, but beneath it burned something fierce and broken, and absolutely unafraid. I lost a child once, Mr. Russo. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it filled the room. You think I would let that happen to another? She walked out without waiting for a response, leaving Dominic standing alone with a question he had not thought to ask, and an answer he was not prepared to understand. Vinny led Grace up the curved staircase, his voice low as they walked. The boy has not spoken since his mother passed. 10 months of silence. He paused at the landing. Doctors call it selective mutism, trauma response. But names do not fix anything. The other nannies? 15 before you. None lasted a month. It is not the work that breaks them. It is the quiet. They cannot stand a child who looks through them like glass. They stopped before a pale blue door with a wooden letter M. This is Mateo's room. Vinny stepped back. Good luck. Grace opened the door and stepped inside. The room was beautiful and cold. Expensive furniture arranged with precision. Shelves of toys still in packaging. A bed with sheets that belonged in a catalog. Everything perfect. Nothing alive. In the center of the floor sat a small boy surrounded by Lego pieces. Mateo did not look up when she entered. His dark hair fell across his forehead as he built a tower, block by careful block. His eyes, brown and warm like his mother's photograph downstairs, held a distance no 4-year-old should know. Grace did not approach, did not crouch with bright smiles and empty promises. She had seen too many adults fill silence with noise because they could not bear discomfort. Instead, she sat on the floor near the door and waited. 10 minutes passed. 20. The only sound was the soft click of Lego pieces. Grace reached for some blocks and began building her own tower. She did not look at Mateo, did not try to catch his attention. She simply built. 30 minutes of silence. Then Mateo turned his head. His eyes found her tower, then her face. Curiosity flickered, fragile and uncertain. Grace kept building. Another minute passed. Mateo reached for a blue block and pushed it gently across the carpet toward her. A small offering. The first in 10 months. Grace added it to her tower without a word. When she glanced at him, something in his expression had shifted. A tiny crack in the wall. That night, Dominic walked past Mateo's room at 9. He never entered. Just walked past, telling himself it was enough. Tonight, he stopped. A lullaby drifted through the open door, soft and sorrowful. He looked through the gap. Mateo lay sleeping, and beside him sat Grace, not touching, not holding, just present, doing what Dominic had not done in 10 months. 2 days later, Dominic made a phone call he had been considering since the moment Grace Sullivan walked through his door. I need additional surveillance, he said into the phone. Inside the house, discreet, undetectable. The security specialist on the other end did not ask questions. Men in Dominic's world never did. Vinny stood in the doorway of the study, arms crossed, disapproval written across his weathered face. He waited until Dominic ended the call before speaking. You are crossing a line, Dom. That woman has not done anything wrong. Everyone has something to hide. Dominic poured himself a whiskey, though it was barely noon. I need to know what happens in this house when I am not watching. You have 40 cameras outside, guards at every entrance. What more do you need? Dominic set the glass down hard. I need control. The word hung between them, heavy with meaning neither man wanted to examine too closely. Vinny sighed. This is not about the nanny, is it? Dominic did not answer. He did not need to. They both knew the truth. The memory surfaced without warning. Elena laughing as she grabbed her keys that morning. The sun catching her dark hair. Mateo pressing his small hand against the window, waving goodbye, and then the explosion that turned everything to fire and screaming and a grief so absolute it nearly stopped his heart. He had not known, had not seen it coming. All his power, all his control, all the enemies he had crushed beneath his heel, and he could not protect the one person who mattered most. That helplessness had almost killed him. Never again. He would never be blindsided again. The technicians arrived after midnight. moving through the house like ghosts. They installed cameras and smoke detectors, behind clocks, in the corners of ceilings where shadows gathered. The living room, the kitchen, the playroom, the hallways, Mateo's bedroom. By 3 a.m, the work was complete. Dominic sat alone in his study, laptop open before him. 8 screens glowed in the darkness, each showing a different room in perfect clarity. He could see everything now. Every corner, every movement, every secret. The tension in his chest eased slightly. This was control. This was safety. This was the only way he knew how to protect what remained of his broken family. He clicked through the feeds methodically. Living room, empty. Hallway, silent. Mateo's room, where his son slept peacefully, one small hand clutching a stuffed dinosaur. Then he reached the kitchen feed and stopped. 1 a.m, and Grace sat alone at the table. No lights, just moonlight through the window, casting silver across her hunched shoulders. Her knees were pulled to her chest, her arms wrapped around them. Her body trembled with silent sobs. On the table before her lay a small photograph. Dominic zoomed in, his breath catching. A little girl smiled up at the camera, auburn hair like Grace's, bright eyes full of joy. 2 years old, maybe 3. Grace touched the photograph with shaking fingers, her lips moving in words the microphone could not capture. And Dominic realized, with a weight settling in his stomach, that he was not the only one in this house running from ghosts. The next morning, Grace appeared in the kitchen at 7, her hair neatly pulled back and her expression calm. No trace of the tears Dominic had witnessed through the camera. No sign of the woman who had shattered in the darkness just hours before. She moved through the morning routine with quiet efficiency, preparing Mateo's breakfast, speaking softly to the boy even though he did not respond. Dominic watched from the doorway, his coffee growing cold in his hands. He noticed things now that he had missed before, the way her fingers occasionally brushed her left wrist, touching something beneath the sleeve of her sweater, the way she deflected any question about herself with a gentle redirect, the way her smile never quite reached her eyes. "Vinny," Dominic said later that morning, once Grace had taken Mateo upstairs for his lessons. "I want a full background investigation. Everything. Leave nothing out." Vinny hesitated. "Dom, I already ran the standard checks before she was hired. She is clean, deeper. I want to know every detail of her life." Something in Dominic's tone stopped Vinny from arguing further. He simply nodded and left. The file arrived that afternoon, thick and heavy in a manila envelope. Dominic locked his study door and began to read. Each page was worse than the last. Grace Elizabeth Sullivan. Mother abandoned the family when Grace was 5. Father, a construction worker, turned to alcohol and violence. 13 years of abuse documented through hospital records and police reports that led nowhere. The scar on her wrist. Not a scar. A burn. Her father had poured boiling water on her when she was 12 years old. Punishment for breaking a dish. At 18, she fled with $47 in her pocket. At 20, she married Ryan Sullivan. The reports painted him as charming, successful, wealthy. The reality was different. More hospital visits. More injuries explained away as accidents. Then came Lily. A daughter. A reason to hope. But Ryan had lawyers. Expensive ones. When Grace tried to leave, he took everything. The courts granted him full custody. Grace was permitted supervised visits only. 6 months later, Lily was dead, 2 years old. Official cause: accidental fall down the stairs in Ryan Sullivan's home. Ryan was never charged. Insufficient evidence. Dominic closed the file. His hands trembled slightly. Something that had not happened since the night Elena died. "She has been through hell." Vinny's voice came from the doorway. "Multiple hells." Dominic said nothing. He turned to his laptop and opened the camera feeds. Grace sat on the playroom floor with Mateo, teaching him to draw. She held a crayon loosely, sketching something simple while the boy watched. A small smile played on her lips, patient and gentle. But her eyes held an ocean of grief that no smile could disguise. That night, Dominic could not sleep. He sat in the darkness of his study, watching the cameras like a man possessed. At 10, Grace entered Mateo's room. She sat beside his bed, not touching him, and began to sing. A lullaby, soft and achingly sad. Dominic watched her face as she sang, watched the way her eyes glistened in the dim light, and for the first time, he wondered, was she singing for his son, or for the daughter she had lost and never had the chance to sing to one last time? 1 week passed. Dominic watched the cameras every day, every night, like a man addicted to something he knew was slowly destroying him. He told himself it was caution, protection, but the truth was simpler and harder to admit. He could not stop. Through the screens, he observed Grace with his son, and what he saw confused him. She did nothing extraordinary, nothing the parenting books would recommend, nothing the expensive child psychologists had suggested during their useless consultations. She simply existed in the same space as Matteo. When he built towers, she sat nearby and watched. When he drew, she drew beside him. When he was silent, she matched his silence without trying to fill it with words. The previous nannies had tried so hard. They talked constantly, asking questions. Matteo would not answer. They suggested activities, offered rewards, pushed for progress. They treated his silence like a problem to be solved, rather than a wound to be healed. Grace understood what they had not. Sometimes presence was more powerful than words. Sometimes a child needed to know someone would stay, even in the quiet, even when nothing was happening, even when hope seemed foolish. Day 8. Dominic watched the camera feed as Matteo and Grace walked toward the staircase. The boy paused at the top step, looking down at the long descent. Then, slowly, his small hand reached out and took Grace's. Dominic's breath caught. Matteo had not voluntarily touched anyone in 10 months. Day 9. The playroom camera showed Matteo working intensely on a drawing. When he finished, he stood and walked to Grace, holding the paper out to her. She took it gently, studied it, and smiled. 2 figures standing side by side beneath a yellow sun, one tall, one small. Day 10. The moment came without warning. Dominic was reviewing the afternoon footage when it happened. Grace sat on the floor of Matteo's room, folding his laundry. Matteo played nearby, arranging his Lego pieces in a pattern only he understood. Then he stopped, looked up at her, his lips parted. Stay. One word, barely a whisper. But it shattered 10 months of silence like glass. Grace froze. Her hands trembled as she set down the shirt she was holding. Tears spilled down her cheeks. But she was smiling, a real smile that transformed her entire face. She opened her arms, and Matteo walked into them. Dominic watched the recording 17 times. He memorized every detail, the way his son's small body relaxed into the embrace, the way Grace held him like he was the most precious thing in the world, the way both of them cried and smiled at the same time. He should have been happy. His son had spoken. The silence was broken, but a different pain tore through Dominic's chest, sharp and unexpected. Matteo's first word in 10 months was not daddy. It was not a call for his father, not a reaching out to the man who had given him life. It was stay, spoken to a woman he had known for only 10 days, a stranger who had done nothing but show up and remain present. She had given Matteo something Dominic could not, and that truth burned worse than any wound he had ever suffered. The next morning, Dominic decided to try. He ordered the most expensive Lego set available, a $2,000 architectural masterpiece shipped overnight. He placed it outside Matteo's door like an offering, then waited in his study, watching through the camera. Matteo glanced at the box, then walked past it without a second look. Dominic tried again. He arranged a private visit to the city zoo, the entire facility closed to the public just for them. Exotic animals, personal guides, everything a child could dream of. Matteo stood beside the elephant enclosure for 3 minutes before tugging on Vinny's sleeve and whispering something. He wants to go home, Vinny reported through the phone. He says Miss Grace promised to read him a story. Dominic tried once more. He knelt before his son that evening, voice gentle, and made a promise. Anything you want, Matteo. Tell Daddy what you want, and I will get it for you. Anything in the world. Matteo looked at him with those brown eyes so much like Elena's. Then he turned and walked away without a sound. That night, alone in his study, Dominic hurled his whiskey glass against the wall. It shattered, amber liquid running down the wallpaper like tears. Feel better? Vinny stood in the doorway, unsurprised by the destruction. I am his father. Dominic's voice cracked. I have given him everything money can buy. Why does he not want me? Because you cannot buy a child's love. Dom. Vinny stepped into the room, glass crunching beneath his shoes. You know that. Then what am I supposed to do? The words tore from somewhere deep, somewhere Dominic had kept locked for 10 months. I do not know how to be a father without Elena. She was the one who knew how to hold him, how to comfort him. I was just the man who provided, the man who protected. That was my role. Vinny was quiet for a moment. Maybe that is the problem. You are trying to be the father Elena wanted you to be, instead of the father Matteo needs. Dominic had no answer for that. Later, alone again, he opened the camera feeds. The playroom appeared on screen. Grace sat in the old rocking chair with Matteo curled against her side. She held a picture book open, her voice too soft for the microphone to capture clearly. Matteo's eyes were half closed, his small hand resting on her arm. The simplicity of it stole Dominic's breath. No expensive toys, no grand gestures, just presence, just warmth, just being there. He looked down at his own hands. These hands had built an empire, had ended lives, had signed documents worth millions, but they did not know how to hold a child, did not know how to offer comfort without condition. A knock interrupted his thoughts. Vinny entered carrying a small wooden box. "Elena left this with me," he said quietly. "She told me to give it to you only when you were ready." He placed it on the desk. "I think it is time." Dominic stared at the box. His wife's jewelry case, delicate and worn, and resting on top, a sealed envelope in handwriting he would recognize anywhere. "For Dominic, when you are ready to live again." Dominic held the envelope for a long time, tracing the familiar curves of Elena's handwriting. His fingers trembled against the paper. He was not ready. He placed the letter in his desk drawer, closed it firmly, and tried to pretend it did not exist. Sleep refused to come. At 2 a.m, Dominic gave up and went downstairs for water. The house was silent, shadows pooling in corners, moonlight cutting through the tall windows. He did not expect to find anyone in the kitchen. Grace sat at the table, a cup of tea cradled in her hands. The tea had long gone cold, untouched. She stared at nothing, her eyes fixed on some distant point only she could see. "You cannot sleep either?" She startled slightly, then composed herself. "I do not sleep much, have not for years." Dominic poured himself a glass of water and, instead of leaving, pulled out the chair across from her. He sat down without asking permission. For a while, neither spoke. The silence between them was different from the silence he shared with others. It was not uncomfortable, not demanding, just two people existing in the same space, carrying weights too heavy for words. "The photograph," Dominic said finally. "The little girl. I saw it that first night." Grace's hand tightened around her cup. Her face went pale, then still. Her name was Lily. She did not ask how he knew. Perhaps she understood that a man like him would find out everything eventually. She would be 4 now, almost the same age as Matteo. Grace's voice was steady, but beneath it lay something vast and deep. "Her father took her from me. Ryan, my ex-husband. He had money, lawyers. I had nothing. The court gave him full custody." She paused, and Dominic waited. 6 months later, she died. They said she fell down the stairs. An accident. The word came out bitter, broken. He was never charged, not enough evidence. She finally looked at Dominic, and her eyes held an ocean of grief. "I was not allowed in that house, not allowed to see her. I could not protect her." Dominic understood. He understood the helplessness, the guilt that never faded, the way loss carved itself into your bones and stayed there forever. "I could not save my own child." Grace's voice dropped to a whisper. "But maybe I can help yours." The silence that followed was heavy but not oppressive. It was the silence of two people who recognized each other's wounds without needing explanation. Grace stood, placing her cold tea in the sink. "I should try to rest. Matteo wakes early." She walked toward the door. Dominic spoke before he could stop himself. "Grace." She turned back, waiting. He wanted to say something meaningful. "Thank you. I understand. You are not alone." But the words tangled in his throat, and all that emerged was simpler. "I am sorry. For your daughter." Her eyes glistened. She nodded once. "I am sorry for your wife." Then she was gone, footsteps fading up the stairs. Dominic sat alone in the dark kitchen and realized this was the first time in 10 months he had wanted someone to stay. 3 weeks had passed since Grace Sullivan walked through the front door. 3 weeks of watching. 3 weeks of cameras and screens and sleepless nights. Dominic had developed a ritual he could not break, a compulsion that pulled him to his laptop every night like a man drawn to his own destruction. Tonight was no different. 2 a.m, the house silent, the world outside dark and cold. Dominic opened his laptop and clicked through the camera feeds. Kitchen, empty. Living room, shadows. Hallway, still. Then Matteo's room. At first, he thought the boy was asleep. The small form under the blankets, the stuffed dinosaur tucked close. But then the blankets shifted. Matteo sat up slowly, carefully, as if trying not to wake anyone who might be listening. The boy climbed out of bed. His bare feet touched the carpet without sound. Dominic leaned closer to the screen, his heart beginning to pound. Matteo walked to the corner of his room, where a small shelf held books, toys, and a single framed photograph. Elena's face smiled out from behind the glass, frozen in a moment of happiness that would never return. The boy knelt before the photograph. His small hands came together, fingers interlocking the way someone had taught him to pray. He looked up at his mother's image, and his lips began to move. Dominic turned up the audio, his hands trembling. "Mommy, I am sorry." The words were soft, barely above a whisper, but they hit Dominic like bullets. "I am sorry because I like Miss Grace. Does that make me a bad boy?" Dominic stopped breathing. "I want her to stay. I want her to hug me. She is warm and she smells nice and she does not yell." Mateo's voice cracked. "But I am scared Daddy will be sad. I am scared if I am happy, you will think I forgot you." Tears fell onto the keyboard. Dominic did not wipe them away. "I did not forget you, Mommy. I think about you every day. But sometimes I want someone to hold me, and you are not here anymore." The boy paused, his small shoulders shaking. "Daddy does not hug me anymore. He does not read to me or sit with me or say goodnight." Another pause, heavier than the last. "I think he hates me because I look like you." Dominic's chest collapsed. The air vanished from the room. His 4-year-old son was kneeling in the darkness, apologizing to his dead mother for wanting to be loved, carrying guilt no child should ever bear, believing his own father hated him. And the person who had planted that belief was not an enemy, not the cruel world outside. It was Dominic himself. Every time he walked past without stopping. Every night he failed to say goodnight. Every moment he chose distance over connection because connection meant pain, and pain meant remembering, and remembering meant falling apart. He had built a fortress to protect his son, and in doing so, he had locked himself outside. Dominic stood so fast his chair crashed to the floor. He ran through the hallway, his footsteps echoing off the walls. His heart pounded like a war drum. His mind screamed at him to do something, say something, fix this. He reached Mateo's door. His hand closed around the handle, and he froze. What would he say? How could he explain? What words could possibly undo the damage he had caused? He stood there, hand on the door, paralyzed by his own failure. In that moment of absolute helplessness, Dominic Russo hated himself more than any enemy he had ever faced. Dominic did not know how long he stood there. Minutes, perhaps an hour. Time lost all meaning in the darkness of that hallway. His hand frozen on the door handle, his body unable to move forward or retreat. Soft footsteps broke through the silence. Grace appeared at the end of the corridor, her robe wrapped tight around her shoulders. She moved toward him quietly, her face pale in the dim light. The baby monitor in her hand explained her presence. She had heard everything. They stood facing each other in the darkness. Two people bound by grief they had never asked for. Grace looked at his face, and her expression shifted. Something softened in her eyes when she saw what he could not hide. The tears, the rawness, the complete and utter devastation of a man who had just discovered he was destroying the one thing he loved most. "You heard him," she said. Not a question. Dominic nodded. Words would not come. Grace reached past him and opened the door gently. Inside, Mateo still knelt before his mother's photograph, small shoulders shaking with silent sobs. She crossed the room without hesitation and gathered the boy into her arms. She did not ask what was wrong, did not demand explanations. She simply held him, rocking slowly, humming a lullaby that seemed to come from somewhere deep and wounded. Dominic watched from the doorway, frozen, unable to enter, unable to leave. Mateo's crying gradually softened. His breathing steadied. His small body relaxed into Grace's embrace as she continued to hum, continued to rock, continued to give him the comfort he so desperately needed. When the boy finally slept, Grace laid him gently in bed and pulled the blankets around him. She pressed a soft kiss to his forehead, then rose and walked back to the hallway. Dominic had not moved. Grace closed the door behind her and turned to face him. Her voice was quiet but direct, carrying no accusation, only truth. "He thinks you hate him because he looks like her. He thinks wanting to be loved makes him a bad son." She paused, letting the words sink in. "Do you know how that destroys a child? To believe they are wrong for wanting the most basic human need?" The silence that followed was suffocating. "I did not know." Dominic's voice cracked, barely a whisper. "I swear I did not know." "You are not a bad man, Mr. Russo." Grace held his gaze steadily. "You are just a scared one. You are terrified of loving him because loving means losing, and you have already lost so much." She took a breath. "But your son is paying the price for your fear, and he is too young to understand why." Dominic's legs nearly buckled beneath him. He pressed his hand against the wall for support. "I do not know how." The confession tore from him, raw and broken. "I do not know how to be his father without her. She was the one who knew what to do. I only knew how to provide." To protect. Without Elena, I am lost. Grace studied him for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. Softer. The voice of someone who understood what it meant to be lost. Then let me show you. The next morning, Grace found Dominic in the kitchen before dawn. He looked like a man who had not slept, dark circles under his eyes, his usual composure fractured. I want to try, he said before she could speak. Tell me what to do. Grace poured 2 cups of coffee and sat across from him. Her plan was simple, almost painfully so. 30 minutes every day. Just you and Mateo. No phone, no work, no guards standing outside the door. She pushed a cup toward him. You do not have to say anything. You do not have to fix anything. Just be there. Dominic stared at her. That is it? That is everything. Day 1. Dominic sat on the floor of Mateo's room, his long legs folded awkwardly beneath him. He felt enormous and clumsy, like a giant trying to fit inside a dollhouse. Every instinct told him to take control, to direct, to manage. But Grace's words echoed in his mind. Just be there. Mateo sat a few feet away, building a Lego tower. He did not look at his father, did not acknowledge his presence. But he did not ask him to leave either. 30 minutes passed in silence. Day 2. Dominic tried to make conversation, asked about the tower, asked about colors, asked about anything. Mateo did not respond. The silence felt heavier than before. Day 3. Dominic remembered how Grace had done it. No words, no pressure, just presence. He picked up a handful of Lego pieces and began building his own small structure beside Mateo. He did not look at the boy, did not try to engage, just built. After 10 minutes, Mateo glanced over, curious, watching. Dominic kept building. Day 4. Mateo reached for a blue Lego piece and held it out toward his father. A small offering, a tiny bridge across the chasm between them. Dominic took it carefully, as if it were made of glass. Thank you, buddy. Mateo did not respond, but he did not look away either. Day 5. They built together, side by side. No words exchanged. But for the first time in 10 months, they existed in the same space without walls between them. When the tower was complete, Mateo looked at it and smiled. A real smile, small but genuine. Dominic had to look away to hide the tears burning in his eyes. From the doorway, Grace watched silently and smiled. Day 7. That evening, Dominic sat on the edge of Mateo's bed with a picture book in his hands. His voice was awkward, stumbling over words meant for a child. He mispronounced names and lost his place twice. Mateo did not seem to mind. He lay against his pillow, eyes fixed on his father's face. When the story ended, Dominic closed the book. Good night, buddy. He started to rise. Daddy? The word stopped him cold. He turned back, heart pounding. Mateo looked up at him with Elena's eyes, soft and deep and full of something fragile. I love you. 3 words. The 3 words Dominic had feared he would never hear. He gathered his son into his arms and held him tight. The tears came then, unstoppable. 10 months of grief and guilt and loneliness breaking free all at once. I love you too, he whispered into Mateo's hair. I love you so much. I am so sorry. And for the first time since Elena died, Dominic Russo let himself feel. 2 weeks passed, and the Russo mansion began to breathe again. Dominic still ran his empire, still made the calls that kept Chicago's underworld in balance. But he came home earlier now. He ate dinner with Mateo. He read bedtime stories, his voice growing steadier with each passing night. Mateo spoke more every day, short sentences, mostly to Grace, but increasingly to his father as well. The silence that had gripped him for 10 months was slowly releasing its hold. For the first time since Elena's death, something resembling peace settled over the house. But the world outside did not care about peace. Vinny arrived one morning with a face that Dominic recognized. The face that meant trouble. The Caruso family knows about the woman. Dominic's blood turned cold. What do you mean? They have been watching her, photographing her when she takes Mateo to the garden, tracking her movements. Vinny laid a folder on the desk. Inside were surveillance photos of Grace, walking through the hallway, standing at the window, playing with Mateo in the yard. They are gathering information, looking for leverage. Dominic's hands curled into fists. The Carusos had been rivals for years, always probing for weakness, and now they had found one. Double the security. No one enters or leaves without my approval. His voice was ice, and Grace does not set foot outside this house. When he told her that evening, Grace's reaction was immediate. I cannot stay locked inside forever. Tommy needs me. I visit him every week at the care facility. It is not safe. He is my brother. He is all I have left. Dominic studied her face, the desperation beneath the composure. He thought of Matteo, of what it meant to protect someone you loved, of the lengths he would go. Then I will bring him here. Grace stared at him. What? Your brother. I will have him transferred to this house. Private room, nurses around the clock, whatever he needs. Dominic met her eyes. It is safer for everyone. For a moment, Grace could not speak. No one had ever done anything like this for her. No one had ever considered her family worth protecting. I cannot ask you to do that. You did not ask. I am offering. Tommy arrived 3 days later, 19 years old, confined to a wheelchair, but with eyes that sparkled with intelligence and warmth. He was given a room on the first floor, equipped with everything he needed. Matteo was fascinated. He sat with Tommy for hours, talking more than he had in months. About dinosaurs, about Lego towers, about the birds outside the window. Tommy listened to every word, responded to every question, and something beautiful grew between them. That night, Dominic called Grace to his study. There is something you need to know. His voice was heavy. The man who ordered the hit on Elena is still alive, and now he knows about you, about Matteo. He paused. If you want to leave, I will understand. I will give you enough money to disappear forever. Grace was silent for a long moment. Then she looked up, her green eyes steady and unafraid. I have been running my whole life, Mr. Russo. She took a breath. This time, I am staying. Sleep refused to come. Dominic lay in the darkness of his bedroom, staring at the ceiling, replaying Grace's words in his mind. She knew who he was, knew the danger that surrounded him like a second skin, knew that staying in this house meant becoming a target, and she had chosen to stay anyway. Not for money. He had offered her enough to vanish, to build a new life somewhere safe. Not for fear. She had proven long ago that she did not fear him. She stayed for Matteo, and perhaps, though neither of them had spoken it aloud, for something else entirely. At 2 a.m, Dominic gave up on sleep. He walked to his study and opened his laptop. The camera feeds glowed to life, 8 windows into his own home. He clicked to Tommy's room. Grace sat beside her brother's bed, her hand wrapped around his. Tommy slept peacefully, his chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. On the small sofa nearby, Matteo had curled into a ball, a blanket draped over his small body, his stuffed dinosaur clutched to his chest. 3 people, none of them connected by blood or obligation. Yet there they were, together in the quiet hours, forming something that looked almost like a family. A strange family, an imperfect family. But real. Dominic stared at the screen, and something shifted inside him. He had installed these cameras to protect himself from being blindsided, to maintain control in a world that had already taken so much. But looking at this image, this fragile constellation of broken people finding comfort in each other, the surveillance suddenly felt wrong. Grace had trusted him enough to stay despite everything she knew. It was time for him to trust her enough to stop watching. Dominic picked up his phone and dialed the head of security. Remove all the indoor cameras. Tonight. A pause on the other end. All of them, sir? Every single one. Are you certain? I have never been more certain of anything. The technicians arrived within the hour, moving silently through the house like ghosts in reverse. They dismantled the hidden eyes one by one. The smoke detectors, the clocks, the ceiling corners, all of it gone. By dawn, the mansion was no longer a surveillance fortress. It was simply a home. That morning, Dominic found Grace in the kitchen, pouring coffee. He poured his own cup and sat across from her at the table. The camera in Matteo's room is gone, she said, without looking up. I noticed. Dominic froze. You knew about them? Grace lifted her eyes to meet his, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. I found them on day 2. The one in the smoke detector was not very subtle. His coffee cup stopped halfway to his lips. You knew this whole time. And you stayed? Grace set down her cup. Her expression softened, revealing something vulnerable beneath the strength. I stayed because Matteo needed me. She paused. And because I think you needed someone to trust you, even when you could not trust yourself. That night, Grace's words echoed through Dominic's mind, like a melody he could not silence. You needed someone to trust you, even when you could not trust yourself. He sat alone in his study, the house finally quiet. No cameras watching, no screens glowing, just the darkness and the weight of everything he had been carrying for 10 months. His hand moved to the desk drawer before he could stop himself. He pulled it open and stared at the wooden jewelry box inside. Elena's box, the letter still resting on top, unopened, waiting. For 10 months, he had been afraid of this moment, afraid that reading her final words would break him completely, afraid that her voice, even on paper, would remind him of everything he had lost and could never recover. But tonight, something was different. His hands did not tremble as he lifted the envelope. The familiar handwriting, elegant loops and gentle curves, blurred slightly as his eyes filled with tears, but he did not stop. He opened the seal carefully, as if the paper itself were sacred. Inside, a single sheet, folded with care. "My dearest Dominic," it began, "if you are reading this, then I am gone, and I know you, my love, better than anyone in this world. I know that right now, you are drowning. I know that you have built walls so high that no one can reach you, because that is what you do when you lose something precious. You hide, you control, you shut out the world so it cannot hurt you again." Dominic's breath caught, even from beyond the grave. She knew him perfectly. "But I need you to hear me now, even though I cannot say these words aloud. Matteo needs you, not the mafia boss, not the man who controls Chicago, not the man everyone fears. He needs his father, the real one, the man who cried watching Disney movies and pretended it was allergies, the man who sang lullabies terribly off-key but tried anyway because he saw how much it made our son smile." A sob escaped Dominic's throat. He remembered those nights. Elena laughing at his horrible singing while Matteo giggled in his crib. "A lifetime ago. Do not let fear win, my love. Do not let it steal our son from you. He looks like me, I know, and I know that must hurt. But he is also you. Your strength, your stubbornness, your heart, even when you try to hide it. Be there for him. Let him know that he is loved, not just protected. There is a difference." The tears fell freely now, dropping onto the paper, smudging the ink at the edges. "And Dominic, if someday you find someone who makes you smile again, who makes Matteo smile, do not feel guilty. Do not push them away because you think loving again means forgetting me. It does not. Love is not a betrayal. It is a gift, and I want you to have it." The final lines blurred through his tears. "Live, my love. Truly live. Not just for Matteo, for yourself. Be happy for both of us. That is my last wish. That is all I have ever wanted for you. All my love, forever and always, Elena." Dominic lowered the letter and wept. Not the silent, controlled tears of a man protecting his image. Real tears. Broken tears. The kind he had not allowed himself since the day they lowered her casket into the ground. He cried for Elena, for Matteo, for all the months he had wasted hiding behind walls that protected nothing and cost everything. When the tears finally slowed, he folded the letter carefully and placed it in his breast pocket, close to his heart. Outside the window, the first light of dawn was breaking over Chicago, and for the first time in 10 months, Dominic Russo knew exactly what he needed to do. The morning sun streamed through the windows as Dominic walked to Matteo's room. His heart pounded with every step, but his resolve did not waver. Elena's letter rested against his chest, giving him courage he had not possessed in 10 months. Matteo sat on the floor, arranging his Lego pieces in careful rows. He looked up when his father entered, those brown eyes so much like Elena's widening with uncertainty. Dominic did something he had never done before. He knelt down, lowered himself to his son's level, met those eyes directly, as equals. "Buddy, Daddy needs to tell you something important." Matteo's small body tensed. His fingers tightened around the Lego piece in his hand. Fear flickered across his face, the fear of a child who had learned that important conversations usually meant more pain. "Daddy has been scared." The words came slowly, each one costing Dominic something. Since Mommy went to heaven, Daddy did not know how to be a good daddy anymore. "I missed her so much that I forgot how to be there for you." Matteo listened, silent, watching, and because Daddy was scared, Daddy stayed away. "I thought if I did not get too close, it would not hurt so much." Dominic's voice cracked. "But that was wrong. That was so wrong. And it was never, ever your fault." A whisper, barely audible. "You do not hate me because I look like Mommy?" The question shattered what remained of Dominic's composure. "No, buddy, no." He reached out and cupped his son's face gently. "I love you because you look like her. Every time I see your eyes, I see the best person I ever knew. You are not a reminder of what I lost. You are a gift she left behind." Tears spilled down Matteo's cheeks. "But I wanted Miss Grace to hug me. I wanted her to stay. Does that make me bad?" "Never." Dominic pulled his son closer. "Wanting to be loved never makes you bad. And Mommy would want you to be happy. She told me so." He reached into his pocket and pulled out Elena's letter. With trembling hands, he unfolded it and read the final lines aloud, If you find someone who makes you smile again, who makes Mateo smile, do not feel guilty. Love is not a betrayal. It is a gift. Be happy for both of us. That is my last wish." Mateo listened to his mother's words, tears streaming freely now. When Dominic finished, the boy threw his arms around his father's neck and held on as if he would never let go. They cried together, father and son, healing together for the first time since that terrible morning 10 months ago. Neither noticed Grace standing in the doorway, her hand pressed to her mouth, tears running silently down her face. But Mateo sensed her presence. He pulled back from Dominic and looked toward the door. "Miss Grace." She stepped forward, wiping her eyes. "I am sorry. I did not mean to interrupt." But Mateo was already moving. He took her hand and pulled her into the room. Then he reached for his father's hand with his other. 3 people stood in a circle, connected by small fingers that refused to let go. Mateo looked up at them both, his eyes still wet but shining with something new. Hope. "Can Miss Grace be my family forever?" Dominic and Grace looked at each other over the boy's head. The question hung between them, carrying weight that a 4-year-old could not possibly understand. But they understood. 1 month later, the Russo mansion had transformed into something none of them had expected. Laughter echoed through hallways that had known only silence. Sunlight poured through windows that had been kept shuttered. The fortress had become a home. Dominic still conducted business, still held the power that made Chicago's underworld tremble. But he came home every evening before dinner. He read bedtime stories. He learned to build Lego towers that did not collapse. Grace watched him change, day by day, into the father Mateo needed. And Tommy had become an unexpected gift. Mateo adored him. The 4-year-old would spend hours in Tommy's room, chattering away while Tommy listened with infinite patience. Mateo taught Tommy how to build Lego structures, carefully placing blocks in his hands. Tommy taught Mateo about patience, about kindness, about seeing the world differently. They were an unlikely family, a mafia boss, a nanny with a shattered past, a silent boy learning to speak again, and a young man bound to a wheelchair, broken pieces that somehow fit together. Then one night, everything shattered. Grace woke to screaming. She ran to Tommy's room and found him convulsing, his body rigid, foam at his lips. The night nurse was already calling for an ambulance, her voice sharp with urgency. The next hours blurred into chaos, sirens, flashing lights, the cold sterility of the hospital emergency room. Grace sat in the waiting area, trembling, unable to breathe. The doctors spoke words she barely understood. Seizure, brain pressure, emergency surgery required. Then the cost, $200,000, not including recovery, not including rehabilitation. She already owed $87,000. The debt hung around her neck like a chain, and now they wanted to add more weight. Impossible weight. "I will sell everything," she whispered to no one. "I will find a way." At 3 a.m, Dominic appeared. He walked through the hospital doors, still wearing the suit he had worn to dinner, now wrinkled, his tie loosened. His eyes found her immediately. "I am paying for everything." His voice left no room for argument. The surgery, the recovery, everything. Grace shook her head, tears streaming. "I cannot take your money. I do not sell myself. This is not a transaction." Dominic crossed the distance between them and took her hand. His fingers wrapped around hers, warm and steady. The first time he had touched her like this. "This is family." The word hung in the air, heavy with meaning neither had spoken aloud until now. Grace looked at their joined hands, then at his face. The walls he had built for decades were gone. In their place was something raw and real. She did not argue again. Tommy's surgery lasted 7 hours. Grace waited in the chapel, praying to a God she was not sure she believed in. Dominic sat beside her, saying nothing, but never leaving. When the surgeon finally emerged with news of success, Grace collapsed against Dominic's chest and sobbed. 3 days later, Tommy opened his eyes. Grace was beside him instantly, holding his hand, crying and laughing at once. "You scared me. Do not ever do that again." Tommy smiled weakly. His eyes drifted past her to where Dominic stood in the doorway, watching. "He is different, is he not?" Tommy's voice was hoarse but knowing. "Your boss, the way he looks at you, like he is afraid you will disappear." Grace did not answer, but her heart had known the truth for longer than she was willing to admit. 2 weeks later, Tommy was strong enough to sit in the garden, sunlight warming his face as Mateo showed him the butterflies. Grace watched from the kitchen window, her heart fuller than she had ever imagined possible. Her brother was alive. He was healing, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could be okay. Vinny arrived that afternoon with news that changed everything. The Caruso family is finished, he told Dominic in the study. Completely dismantled. Their leader is dead. Dominic looked up from his desk. How? The Morettis. They owed you a debt from years ago. They decided to repay it. Vinny paused. The man who ordered Elena's death died 3 days ago. It is over. Over. Dominic had waited 10 months for this moment, had imagined it countless times. The satisfaction of knowing that the man who destroyed his world had paid the ultimate price. But sitting here now, hearing the news, he felt nothing. No triumph, no relief, no closure, just emptiness where rage used to live. He realized then what Elena had tried to tell him in her letter. Revenge could not fill the void. Only love could do that. That evening, Dominic called a meeting with his most trusted men. They gathered in the formal dining room, confusion evident on their faces. I am stepping back, Dominic announced. Vinny will take over all operations. Silence. Then murmurs of disbelief. You are leaving? One of the captains asked. After everything, I lost my wife to this life. Dominic's voice was steady, certain. I will not lose anyone else. He looked at Vinny, the man who had been like a father to him for decades. Vinny nodded slowly. I will protect your family with my life. You have my word. Later that night, Dominic found Grace on the balcony. She stood with her arms wrapped around herself, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. I made a decision today, he said, stepping beside her. I am leaving the business. Grace turned to look at him. Her expression held no surprise. I know, Vinny told me. Of course he had. Are you disappointed? Dominic asked quietly. That I am not the powerful man you first met? Grace smiled, soft and genuine. I never cared about your power, Dominic. I cared about the man underneath. The one who learned to build Lego towers. The one who reads bedtime stories. The one who paid for my brother's surgery without asking for anything in return. Dominic stepped closer, closing the distance between them. Grace, I need to ask you something. His voice wavered slightly. I want you to stay, not as a nanny, as part of this family, as part of my life. Her eyes glistened in the moonlight. Are you sure? I am broken, Dominic. I have scars you cannot see, wounds that may never fully heal. He reached out and took her hand, intertwining his fingers with hers. So am I. He met her eyes. Maybe two broken people can build something whole together. 1 year later, the Russo mansion had transformed beyond recognition. The iron gates that once screamed danger now stood open during daylight hours. The windows, always shuttered before, welcomed sunlight into every corner. And laughter, real laughter, echoed through hallways that had known only silence and grief. Matteo was 5 years old now, healthy, talkative, always running, always smiling, always asking questions about everything. He was exactly what a child should be, curious and joyful, and unafraid of the world. Tommy lived with them permanently. His room on the first floor had been customized with everything he needed. He was taking online university courses, studying creative writing, dreaming of becoming an author someday. His stories, he said, would be about hope, about families that found each other in unexpected ways. Grace and Dominic did not rush. They had both carried too many wounds, survived too many storms, to pretend that healing happened overnight. But slowly, carefully, they built something neither had dared to imagine. Each day, they grew a little closer. Each night, their conversations lasted a little longer. Each morning, their smiles became a little more real. On a warm Sunday afternoon, they went to the park, the same park where Elena used to bring Matteo before everything changed. Dominic had avoided this place for over a year, but today felt different. Today felt right. He sat on a wooden bench, Grace beside him, their fingers intertwined naturally. Neither spoke. They did not need to. Matteo ran across the grass, chasing butterflies, his laughter ringing through the air like music. Tommy sat nearby in his wheelchair, a sketchbook balanced on his lap, capturing the scene with careful pencil strokes. Vinny stood at a distance, watching over them, no longer a bodyguard, more like a beloved uncle, protective and proud of the family he had helped build. Suddenly, Matteo came running back, something clutched in his small hand. Daddy, Daddy, look. He held up a single blue feather, delicate and perfect. Mommy Elena sent this from heaven, Matteo announced with absolute certainty. She wants us to know she is happy. Dominic took the feather carefully. He looked up at the endless blue sky, then down at his son, then at Grace. His voice was steady when he spoke. She wants us to be happy. Grace squeezed his hand gently. then we will not let her down. Dominic looked around at this strange, beautiful family he had never expected. His son, laughing and whole again. Tommy, dreaming of futures that once seemed impossible. Grace, who had walked through fire and emerged with enough love left to share. Vinny, loyal and constant through everything. He no longer needed cameras to feel safe. He no longer needed control to feel strong. Because true safety came from trust, true strength came from love, and true courage was not the absence of fear. It was choosing to love despite the fear, choosing to live fully, even knowing that loss could come again at any moment. That was the bravest thing a man could do. And finally, Dominic Russo was brave enough to do it. This story reminds us of a profound truth. Love is never a weakness. The walls we build to protect ourselves often become the prisons that keep us from living. Family is not always about blood. Sometimes, it is about broken people choosing to heal together. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel, press the like button, and share this video so others can experience this journey too. We bring you meaningful stories every day, and your support helps us continue. We would love to hear from you. How did this story make you feel? Have you ever experienced the healing power of love and trust in your own life? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your stories and feelings matter deeply to us. Thank you for watching until the end. We wish you good health, happiness, and peace in your daily life. Goodbye for now, and we will see you in the next video.